What's going on, guys? It's Critical Fish, and I'm back with a new type of video today. And I'm going to be discussing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and specifically the third and final entry in the Remake trilogy. If you don't know, I am a massive Final Fantasy VII fan, and I am extremely engaged in what the developers have been cooking behind the scenes. I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, as well as Rebirth, and I am super excited for Part 3. And while I don't typically talk about in-game analysis and predictions for the games that I love to play, this is a special video because I figured, when am I ever going to get the chance to predict one of my most anticipated video games of all time? So I felt the need to put my thoughts out in this video and explain and predict what I think is going to be in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Now, the first chunk of this video is going to be non-spoiler predictions, and then the second chunk of this video will contain a lot of spoilers. So if you're scared of any story-related news or predictions, definitely do not watch the second part of this video, and you can already get a taste as to what I'm thinking about in the bottom corner here. I've got my list of predictions. So with that being said, maybe give this video a like or subscribe for more game industry analysis and some product reviews and unboxings over time on Critical Fish. So let's start with the first prediction that I have, and that is the name of the third and final entry in this series. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 will be called Final Fantasy VII Return. And I think the thematic implications of it being called Return make a lot of sense. You know, there's a lot of chatter in the game about returning to the planet when a character dies. Their energy goes back to the planet, and they call it a return to the planet. There's also key events that are bound to happen in Part 3 of this game, like the reunion. There's also the potential for worlds to go back to where they came from because there are multiple merging timelines, and so they could return back to form. There's a lot of different implications for the word return, but I think it's the most fitting. It deals a lot with the theme of life and death. And I think because they can't use reunion, I think return is the next best bet. It's 2 syllables, it's 6 letters, just like remake. Rebirth, well, rebirth is 7, but you get the point. I think it's going to be called Return. And I also think it will be a green logo. The next prediction that I have here is the intro of the game. And this is a tough one because if you played the original Final Fantasy VII back in the day, you would know that that game was a complete package on 3 separate discs, but it only ever had one intro to the story. But because of how they've structured this remake, they've had to had multiple intros and endings to each of the games. So in Rebirth, they opened the game with Zack Fair in his own timeline, and I believe that they're going to do something similar and explain more backstory to Sephiroth. So I think that in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you started as Cloud. In Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you started as Zack. And I think in Final Fantasy VII Return, you're going to start as Sephiroth and get some backstory to his character to set up his true villain arc in the final act of the game. And I do think we're going to see a lot of his story beats coming from the mobile game Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, because that has really expanded on Sephiroth's backstory as a hero. I personally don't know most of it, so I would be excited to see it brought to the third part in the trilogy. The next prediction that I have here is a gameplay-oriented one, and it's the fact that you're going to be able to swap out characters mid-combat. And what do I mean by this? Well, In Remake and in Rebirth, you had to select 3 characters to play as at a time, and they would be the ones to enter combat. Once you entered combat, you could not swap your character. And I believe because in Final Fantasy Part 3, you're going to have up to 9 characters, I want to say, or 8 characters at a time that you'll be able to swap out, Tifa with Red 13 or Barrett with Sid. And I just think that will make the combat more in depth, more engaging, and it'll allow for a lot of different play styles and probably make the game tougher in some ways as well. Another gameplay prediction that I have is that because this game is still open world structured and has more areas for us to explore as the players, that the developers will structure the side quests and exploration a little bit differently and probably for the better than how they did it in Rebirth. In Rebirth, the game was very comparable to something like an Ubisoft open world game, where you would have checkpoints and icons telling you exactly where everything is, telling you exactly what you would earn from doing said event. And everything was very predictable and not super exciting. And at times it felt repetitive. But I think from a design perspective, hopefully the developers got our word and are designing their worlds a little bit more openly. Let players explore what is in your game. Don't tell me there's a side quest over there. Let me go walk over there, see something cool, and then start the side quest as a result of that, or go into a cave, or find a hidden chest, or something like that. I think if they do that for Part 3, there's a lot of hidden creative elements that they can hide throughout the world that would just make it so much more fun to explore and make it more natural. Another small prediction I've got here is that some of the areas that appear in the spin-off versions of Final Fantasy VII will make an appearance in Part 3. Specifically, one that I'm going to predict is Benora from Crisis Core. Now, if I remember correctly, this was an area that was destroyed, I want to say. But maybe its remnants or something can be found throughout the world. And I'm also going to throw in a small prediction here that you might fight a certain red-haired character, just as a little bonus tease or something like that in this specific area. And I would love to see that, honestly. Speaking of open world choice and freedom and exploration, I predict that Cloud or different members of the party will be able to use other vehicles other than chocobos. And I'm going to go ahead and predict that you can ride the Hardy Daytona in the open world segments of this game. Now, maybe it won't exactly be the Hardy Daytona from the Midgar Expressway chase, but I have a feeling that you're going to be able to use vehicles like you were in Final Fantasy 15. And if they do that, I would totally be riding motorcycles throughout the world of Gaia. That would just be a sick addition in my eyes. One of the final non-spoiler predictions that I have is that Chadley, who was a companion throughout both Remake and Rebirth, will serve to be an ultimate final optional boss that you can fight and get some really strong rewards from. Now, why do I think this? Chadley in the first game revealed that he was a creation of Hojo, and Hojo is one of the main villains. He's a scientist, and he developed Chadley to study the world through his eyes, get, world intel, combat data, etc. But I think at some point, this implication that Hojo created Chadley will kind of turn against the party, whether or not Chadley wants it, and you will actually have to fight Chadley based off of his knowledge that he knows about you and how you like to fight, what you're good at, what materia you use, and he will actually be an adaptive, challenging, very dynamic boss fight in the game somehow. I think that would just make a lot of sense. And one of my final non-spoiler predictions for part 3 is that the storyline with the whispers and the merging timelines will come to an end, but I still don't think it's going to be a very satisfying ending. I think in general, once this concept was introduced to the remake trilogy, it was going to be kind of murky in terms of how they cover it. It certainly wasn't clear in part 1. Part 2 gave some clarification, but also added new elements as to this timeline stuff that's going on. And I don't really know if part 3 can bring it around and make this a really strong, compelling, clever narrative twist, you know? I think they're going to end it, but I don't think it's going to be some super clever, like satisfying conclusion. And I don't think it will necessarily justify the whispers existing in the game. But I'm willing to look past it. I just predict that it's going to be a little messy still. And that's all my predictions that are non-spoiler oriented. Let's get into the section of the video where I'm talking spoilers, because I know everything about the original, well, mostly everything, and I am just so excited to see how some of these elements are portrayed in Return. So let's start with the first one, which is the Knights of the Round Table. Now, the Knights of the Round Table are a summon that you could use during combat, and it was pretty much extremely overpowered. It was tied to this really long quest line that you had to do to earn the materia to summon them. And, you know, there's a lot of videos of people using this summon in late game fights, especially the final boss fights of the game. And it just seems like it's very fitting. You know, your characters are strong, the summon's even stronger, so it's an earnable, cool reward. My prediction, though, is that this Knights of the Round Table will have a very specific quest line and almost kind of treasure hunt that you're going to have to do towards the end game when you're playing as Cloud to eventually use in some of the late game fights. I think if they do the quest line like how they did Gilgamesh in Rebirth, that they've got the opportunity to make a very cinematic, cool, and worthwhile quest line. Another prediction that necessarily is not my own is that Ben Starr will be in Return. He will voice one of the characters, but the character in question is actually going to be the Golden Chocobo, which is a earnable reward, kind of like the Knights of the Round Table. It's a super overpowered chocobo that runs really fast and does a bunch of other stuff. But if they make Ben Starr voice the Golden Chocobo, which was kind of an ongoing discussion on Twitter with the developer, it would be hilarious. I'm not going to lie. If they gave a chocobo a talking voice and it had the deep, Clive Rossfield type of voice going on, that would just be hilarious. So, hoping that that's the case. Another prediction that I've got is that when the party is diving back into Midgar, I think that once you hit the ground and start exploring the world again, leading up to the fight with Hojo, I think that the bombing run mission will play again, just like it does in the original game. But I think this time around it's going to be extremely badass. I think it's going to be, it's just going to be fueling you up to get back into Midgar. It's going to be slightly nostalgic, but very powerful in the sense that you're really going home and going strong like you were in the bombing run in the very first portion of the remake. Another prediction I've got here is that Dio from the Golden Saucer, the guy who's buff and jacked and helps you in Rebirth, will actually ride the buggy and will help the party during the sequence of the hunt for the huge materia. There's a portion of the game where the characters are in Corel. They're on a train to get I think the huge materia. And I think that it would be pretty smart if Dio was in the buggy, alongside the train to kind of help the party fight and get to the front of the train. Just something small that I thought of, but it would make sense. Another prediction that I've got here is that Sid Highwind from the original game and his original personality, where he was kind of rugged and rude and mean and he had cigarettes in his mouth all the time. I think that version of Sid still exists and that we'll actually see that in Rocket Town once the party goes to Rocket Town at some point during the adventure. Now, why do I think this? I think that a lot of Sid's character is built around the fact that he is triggered by his wife, Shara. And she lives in the town of Rocket Town. They're there with the crooked rocket that couldn't take off in the Shinra program. And I think a lot of his misery kind of stems from just being in the environment where all these troubles and issues came up over time. And I also think that one of the reasons that he is a very happy, outgoing character in Rebirth is because he's away from that. In Rebirth, he's flying planes, he's on his own, he's doing his own thing, and he's not really worried about, the past or what happened to him in the past. And if you don't remember, like a lot of the characters in Remake are actually happy and outgoing when they're not thinking about like the terrible experiences that they've had in the past. So I think that shift in personality is going to happen just like it did with Barrett when he got back to Corel and the Gold Saucer. So we're going to see Sid Highwind smoking cigs, guaranteed. Another deep prediction that I've got, and this is one that is an overarching developing narrative from Rebirth, is that we are going to see Cloud putting Aerith in the water for her burial sequence. When they were in the Forgotten Capital. The ending of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth got a lot of criticism for not showing a lot of these elements and changing how we witnessed the events unfold at the end of the game compared to the original game. But I think that Rebirth specifically structured some of its shots and its narrative changes to make sure that it's clear that Cloud is, being manipulated by himself. He's kind of delusional at this point, and he's in denial that Aerith has died. So I think that part of his memory actually wipes out the fact that he buries Aerith in the water at the Forgotten Capital, and he doesn't want to accept that Aerith is dead. But I think in the live stream sequence, when Cloud and Tifa work together to repair Cloud's mind, that he at some point is actually going to come back to the reality that Aerith did die, and even though she's dead, he's going to keep her promise going. But we will witness the entire sequence where he puts her in the water. Another prediction that I have is that Bahamut and the fight in Midgar that happens during Advent Children, which is 2 years after the original game takes place, will be playable in some way. I don't exactly know how. Everybody is kind of saying that this is going to happen. And I do think it makes a lot of sense for the portion of the movie to be playable. I have 2 ideas that come to mind. I think that if we get some kind of sequence in Return that goes over maybe, the changes of the planet over time, if we go back to the past to go see like the Ancients' civilization, that would be cool. But we could also go forward in time and maybe see what the bad timeline looks like where Advent Children takes place, and you would have to fight Bahamut with the party. or they kind of tack it on in a DLC, but they try to merge it into the storyline of the game and say that maybe it's one of the one of the like multiverse possible world realities that gets created through the whispers and stuff. Another quick one is that Wutai, the area that Yuffie is from in the original game, will be a required area in Return. And I think this because it's just a major area, you know. You've got some characters returning there like the Turks and Don Corneo, and there's probably some room to add characters here as well, but they definitely teased it in Intergrade with the Happy Turtle songs and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a required segment of the game. One of the final predictions that I've got is that the Highwind will be fully, controllable, flyable, and it'll be interconnected with the world. But I do think that they're going to add aerial combat into the game, where you'll be able to fight other like Shinra helicopters or maybe the weapons in the sky, something like that. I think that this vehicle could definitely get some upgrades with weapons and fighting in the air. I think that would be so cool. And I think at any point you'll be able to jump off of the Highwind with a parachute. Second to last prediction that I've got is that the Tifa versus Scarlet fight that happens at Junon will turn into a full cinematic boss fight. And it just makes sense, and I think that would be really cool. And the final prediction that I've got that is based off of a prediction that I watched from another Final Fantasy VII YouTuber called Sector 6 made. He predicted that the game will not end once the meteor falls on Gaia, which is where the game ends in the original version of the game. You see Aerith praying with the life stream and preventing the meteor from falling. But he predicts that it will not end here in Return. And it kind of made me excited, but also upset at the same time because I think he's completely right. I think Meteor will be stopped, but the fact that so many things are going on here, it makes me think that the developers' initial ideas for the multiverse, the whispers, Sephiroth being like an omnipowerful present, Sephiroth, Aerith being an omnipresent, Aerith, all these elements, you've got Zack in another timeline still alive. I just think all these elements are going to come together and allow for something to happen after Aerith prevents Meteor from coming down. One of the ideas is that this will allow Zack's timeline to merge with the current timeline and he'll be fully back. Another idea is that you will have a true final fight at the edge of creation, where Sephiroth can die finally and not merge back into the live stream. If he dies in the edge of creation, maybe that's the thing that fully cuts him off from doing the geostigma virus that happens in Advent Children. That's kind of where my mind's going, but who knows? But I think Sector 6 is onto something. So that's going to be it for my predictions for Final Fantasy VII Part 3, aka Return. I'm going to come back to this video at some point and pray that I got some of these right. But if I didn't, not a huge deal. It just kind of ties into the fact that I'm very interested in all things video games, news related or game design related. And I hope that you guys leave some of your own ideas in the comments below. I think I covered a good chunk of stuff. Maybe most of it's pretty surface level, but I don't want to dive too deep and have too many expectations as to what Part 3 is going to bring. I just know that it's going to be a great game, and I hope that we see it at the Game Awards, and I hope that you watch my reaction to it live on December 11th. So with that being said, have a great day and stay tuned for more videos from Critical Fish.